Hi, I'm Kjell Anderson, Principal and Director of Sustainable Design at LMN Architects in Seattle. How many of you have seen a headline in the last week claiming a carbon neutral or net zero project? How many of you have done one of those? Do you believe those claims? Does it hurt our industry when companies make misleading claims about carbon neutrality? Our position at LMN is that even net zero certifications are not actually net zero carbon for two main reasons. One, they're not comprehensive and they exclude major sources of carbon. And two, they rely on offsets, and most offsets aren't doing everything they say they are. In order to determine how we at LMN are approaching carbon neutrality and update our path to our sustainable action plan, we researched and created this Path to Zero Carbon series, a fail-forward, free collaboration with dozens of industry leaders to get to zero in every carbon emission source in the built environment. Let's talk about carbon offsets first. Emissions cause damage, so some entities have come up with a way to estimate the cost of damages to others. In theory, we should pay for people moving off islands that will be underwater because of our emissions, for damages caused by disasters, such as hurricanes, that are exacerbated by climate change, for crop failures due to climate change, etc. We've had 23 disasters in the US this year alone, worth over $1 billion. But we currently don't pay anything for carbon, at least directly. On the right, you see what we pay for voluntary carbon offsets, as low as $2 a ton, which are often used for carbon neutrality claims in buildings. And the actual cost of removing carbon from the atmosphere is $200 a ton or more. And several studies show that most carbon offsets don't live up to the promises that they make. The reference study suggests that a majority of offsets reviewed are likely junk. Whether they are junk or not, they trick us into thinking we've already made carbon neutral projects that have avoided doing the hard work of actually reducing our own emissions across every source in the building sector. This is critical work, and offsets are a distraction. So this is a more comprehensive carbon accounting for an office building in a moderately low carbon electricity grid. You can see that operational carbon is still a significant portion at 38% of emissions, and of these, a certain amount is the delta between annualized emissions and time of use emissions. Structure, envelope, MEP embodied carbon, interiors, refrigerants, and others are included, but transportation and energy generation systems are excluded from this particular study. So this is a net zero example building. We traded off offsite electricity generation carbon emissions for the embodied carbon of building new renewable energy systems, which is an 85% reduction in total carbon. That's great. I'm also assuming here that the advanced building reduced refrigerant emissions. So we get to about a 37% reduction for a net zero building, net zero energy building. 37% is good, but not near zero carbon. Now this building is a reuse with modest energy savings. We significantly reduce structural emissions as well as envelope and MEP and some interiors, a 40% total reduction. Not zero carbon, but well along the way. How about a net zero building that is actually a building reuse? Well, in this case, we approximate about a 70% reduction. The trick with all of this is that if we don't use offsets, we need to get to zero in each of these areas, or close to zero in each of these areas. Work with manufacturers to get MEP embodied carbon to zero, work with a circular economy to get interiors to zero, work on systems that use very low or zero carbon refrigerants, etc. It undervalues all of our efforts when someone prematurely claims they've reached carbon neutrality. And here are some groups working on these areas. Please join one or more of these groups. MEP 2040 for refrigerants and MEP embodied carbon seems relevant for this group, but you can actually join the CLF chapters in San Francisco or LA, or you could start your own if there isn't one in where you are. So while I have you here, as an architect, I believe we can work together more productively. The goal that I have is to trade off improved envelope performance for reduced size and cost of mechanical systems, which also reduces energy use. The top graph on the right shows current practice, with most teams sometimes seeing such savings where you can trade off envelope for improved or for reduced mechanical size and cost. But the bottom right shows that if we had better early cost and energy modeling and better communication, often or always, most practitioners believe we would get those kinds of savings, which are cost neutral and reduce embodied carbon of mechanical systems as well. We should be good at this by now, but we're not yet there. So in sum, there are no carbon neutral buildings yet, but there are a lot of claims. To be honest, we need to calculate a comprehensive carbon footprint, and we can begin trading off improvements in one area against increases in another area to make carbon smart decisions. we need to calculate and communicate carbon comprehensively. If anybody has any comments on this series, please send them to me because we can update it at any time. Thank you. Have a great conference.